Good evening, everyone, from wherever you're joining us from. To tonight's talk, presented from Street Level Photoworks in Glasgow. I'm Malcolm, I'm the director of Street Level, and great pleasure it is too. We'll be joined by a special guest, Mandy Barker, very soon, whose exhibition, Our Plastic Ocean, opens at Street Level on Saturday from 12 midday onwards. So plan your weekend well. It's an exhibition that's been produced by Impressions Gallery in Bradford, wonderful gallery that we work with very well. And so this is something of a preview of the exhibition, and it's presented in association with the Govanhill International Festival and Carnival, which is on now, and at which you can also encounter the exhibition by Simon Murphy, Govanhill Street Level Mark II. This exhibition is also a central feature of Everything Flows, which is a series of exhibitions in coastal places. Too many to mention here, but it's part of our year of coast and waters, and it's very appropriate and a very appropriate fit for this. And tonight's talk, I suppose, is a great way to herald the countdown to COP26 that's happening in Glasgow in November. Housekeeping, this has been streamed live to Facebook, obviously, which is where you're watching it from. There is the comments feed into which you can put your questions. After Mandy's presentation of about 30 minutes, we'll then come to the Q&A section. Questions will be fed through to me, and I'll pass them on to Mandy. My colleague John, behind the scenes, who's operating the controls, will feed those questions to me. Now, we may not get through them all, if there are a lot, but it will remain live on Facebook, and Mandy may well come back to that and answer your questions. So it's kind of active and ongoing. We'll then upload it to our YouTube channel as well. So there's different ways that you'll be able to see it. But the best thing is to be there live on the night, which is now. So if you'd like to join us now, Mandy, we can introduce you. If you would just switch your video on now. There, Mandy. Yeah. Hi, Mandy. Hi.
Hello. Hi.
Yeah. And where are you at the moment?
I'm in Leeds, in England. Yeah.
Okay, very good.
So, sorry, I can't actually be there, but
yeah. Maybe before the duration of the before the show finishes, hopefully,
yeah.
things will be safe enough. But there'll be lots of digital options to encounter the exhibition. I know it's not as good as the real thing. Now, I think we first met in 2013 at Format Portfolio Review.
That's right. Yeah.
So what's that? 7 years ago, and you first showed me this work, which was really quite fascinating. It's great that Impressions have put this together now as this kind of packaged exhibition that we were able to take fairly easily. And I came across an email. We exchanged some emails at the time in 2013, and it was like an email called Calling All Footballs. You were making a plea for people who had found footballs on various beaches to send them to you. And I think you'll probably talk about that during your presentation, won't you?
I will, yes. And yeah, good to know you got one.
Yeah. So I'll just give you a brief introduction for those who do not know. You're an international award-winning photographer. Your work involves you've been working with marine plastic debris for at least 10 years, and it's received quite a lot of global recognition. In fact, you work a lot with scientists, and that aims to raise awareness about plastic pollution in the world's oceans and highlighting the harmful effect of marine life and ourselves. Ultimately and importantly, of course, that's about leading to action. Your work's been published in over 50 countries, and it's been exhibited worldwide. I think if you go to Mandy's website About page, in exhibitions. You will get a huge list of all the exhibitions that Mandy has participated in, commissions she has received. Again, there's really far too many to mention, but just a couple of extracts from your CV here, just to mention. You were shortlisted for the Pre-Piclet Awards Space 2017, which is the world's leading photography award for sustainability, nominated for the Magnum Foundation Fund, Deutsche Börse Foundation Photography Prize. 2018, you're the recipient of National Geographic Society grant for research and exploration. Your first book, Beyond Drifting Imperfectly Known Animals, was selected as one of the 10 best photography books of 2017 by the Smithsonian. And that's the book there, little book, and it kind of takes the form of an old style science book, a really lovely little item. I was lucky enough to get that at Unseen Photo Fair 3 years ago. It's sold out now, I have to say, but worth sharing. Your other book, most recent one, which is this, Altered Ocean, published fairly recently. That was chosen by the RPS as one of the most coveted titles and top 10 photo books of 2019. You're a member of Union of Concerned Photographers, UCP, which is dedicated to using the power of imagery to underline the urgency of environmental concerns. On that note, I would like to quote Sir David Attenborough. Now, I'm not in the habit of calling anyone Sir, but David is such a great citizen, he deserves it. And this is from a handwritten note that he wrote to you saying, I hope your work does its job in raising awareness of the cause we both care so much about, with renewed wonder and best wishes. And as I say, that's an extract from a personal handwritten letter, which we may touch upon a bit later on. Now, there's a lot included in your presentation, Mandy, so I think we will now move on to that, and we'll return to the audience when you've concluded your presentation. So it gives me great pleasure to pass it over to you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to Street Level for hosting my exhibition, and also for inviting me to speak tonight. So hello, everyone. So basically, I'm going to talk for about 30 minutes about my journey over the last almost 11 years. Basically, I've called it an unnatural journey because I had absolutely no idea when I started out that it would receive the coverage it has. And also the unnatural aspect of man-made material of plastic that's taken me there. So basically, this is where I began, on Spurn Point. It's a peninsula on the east coast of England. It's very near to my hometown of Hull. I spent a lot of time there as a child, and I used to collect the natural objects like everybody did. But revisiting my parents over the past sort of 20 years, I began to notice a lot of rubbish washing up on there, especially plastic items. These are just a few. And I realised this isn't typical of this place. It actually exists everywhere. So what I did was I started to collect single objects that I found, because I thought it would be quite good to let people know what existed and what different types of plastic and objects that you find on beaches. So this series was called Indefinite, and I started with, you can see on the right, a plastic bag. And as I was actually photographing the objects, they almost began to look like the very creatures that they're affecting. Perhaps coral, or perhaps plankton, or some sort of creature in the ocean. On the left, these are plastic bag handles, which are, when you take plastic bags from a supermarket, the handles that are left. And on the right-hand side, these are PVC fisherman's gloves. I decided to just use a very simple caption, because I decided it didn't really need a lot of description, and it's just the amount of years that it takes them to break down in the ocean. So I created a timeline using the different types of plastic, starting from 1 year and ending to Indefinite, which is the title of the series. And Indefinite is the aerated plastic polystyrene, which breaks down into smaller particles but never ever goes away. But since I created this project in 2010, scientists have now discovered that all plastic is with us. Unless it's been burnt, all plastic ever made is with us. So essentially all these materials now are indefinite. This is an image that was taken in 2004, and this is in Scotland on the border of Dumfries and Galloway, a stunning location, sadly marred by the look of plastic on the beach here. I've been visiting this beach for the past 8 years, and the amount of plastic is still the same, sadly. And I struggle, you know, after half an hour, I'm struggling with several bags to sort of bring back from my work. One of the things that led me to carry on and do further projects with plastic is this photograph that I took in a hotel room in Hong Kong. I'd gone to a marine debris conference, and this lady had a bag of plastic that she was handing round, and I asked her if I could just borrow it and take a quick picture. This is actually 276 pieces that were taken from the stomach of an albatross chick, a 30-day-year-old chick. And obviously the plastic is fed to the chicks by the parent birds, who think they're feeding the chicks with food, but sadly they don't realise that it's not food, and the chicks get full and then they die of starvation because, you know, they think they're full and they don't go on to eat any proper food. This second picture again is a collection from the same event. These pieces of plastic were actually taken from several different albatross chick stomachs. But to think a golf ball or your toothbrush or your inkjet cartridge could end up in the stomach of a bird, I think that shocked me beyond belief, and that's what's made me sort of carry on, especially when that's the inkjet cartridge that's in my printer at home. So I started to create the SOUP series of images, which basically SOUP is a description given by scientists to the suspension of plastic in the oceans. And I always work with sketchbooks, write down my ideas, you know, I stick scientific notes in there, and I kind of formulate what composition I'm going to do or the thinking behind it. And this particular image was based on a containers full of bath toys. They actually fell into the sea from in the North Pacific. It was traveling from China to the US. And it was a set of 4 children's bath toys that sank to the bottom of the sea in a container, then spilled open, and they floated around the world ever since. So I chose the turtle from the set of 4. There was a duck, a beaver and a frog, and created this kind of suspension, these kind of different sequences of the turtles moving around. There were 28,800 in all, and they've been found all over the world ever since. And scientists have been able to map ocean currents based on these sort of floating toys that have you know, been frozen in the Arctic and then moved on to various different lands. This image shows how difficult it is for wildlife to distinguish between plastic and natural fish eggs, shown here. So on the left, this is monofilament fishing line, which is really strong line that you know, takes 600 years to ever break down. So it's really easy for nature to mistake plastic in the ocean. So using the monofilament fishing line balls, they've been rolled in and out by the tide to create these kind of nest-like balls. I created this image called Bird's Nest Soup, and it was based on a swarm of jellyfish. When I was on holiday, I was on a Greek island, and I saw goats on the shoreline that seemed to be eating something. So I went up and had a look to see what they were chewing. And of course, it was plastic, plastic that had come in from the sea, and they were trying to ingest it. So I collected all the bits of plastic that they'd tried to swallow and ingest, but obviously sadly couldn't do that. And all these bits have got teeth marks on. Ironically, at the top of the picture, you can see 3 goats' teeth there, which obviously they were losing the teeth because the plastic's so hard. And alongside that is a toothpaste tube. So a bit of an irony there in that composition. Another image that was based on a photograph that I saw by Susan Middleton that she'd taken in 2004. This is actually the contents of an albatross's stomach, 500 plus pieces that she'd found. There's even a tag in there from a patrol bomber that went down in 1944. So just to show, you know, the sort of timeline of when plastic began. So I based an image based on her collection of 500 plus pieces from the stomach. I collected my pieces from beaches around Europe, and this is my take on 500 plus pieces of plastic, thinking and being mindful of what was in the stomach of the albatross. Around the time of Christmas, I thought it'd be really good to create something to try and draw people in. So I went to a nature reserve and collected white plastic pieces to try and create a snow flurry of plastic. Sadly, it only took me about 2 afternoons to collect, over 2 hours. And this is called Every Snowflake is Different, because every snowflake has a different molecular structure. And I thought that if I collected white pieces that were all kind of different objects and sort of different types of plastic, then it would again raise awareness of what's out there. So my work is underpinned by scientists, and this was a trip I did in 2012. I was lucky enough to receive the Royal Photographic Society Environmental Bursary, and this took me on a voyage from Japan to Hawaii, across the tsunami debris field that was a result of the tsunami from Japan in March 2011. And the scientists wanted to study the plastic because they knew exactly when it left land, as opposed to normally when plastic enters the ocean, you don't really know where it's entered it and for how long it's been there. But they could make assumptions about invasive species and degradation of plastic and things like that based on this timeline. So I was on the yacht for a month with the scientists, and I photographed every piece of plastic that was brought on board over this time. I gave the images the grid reference points of where the plastic was collected and brought on board. It was called shoal because all the time I was looking down and seeing these stunning shoals of fish and dolphins that were swimming under the yacht, but then at the same time being mixed in with this kind of sinister collection of plastic from the tsunami. When I got to Hawaii, it didn't stop there. I actually wanted to go and visit Camilo Beach, which I'd heard was a particularly bad beach for plastic. And yeah, true to form, absolutely shocking. This is the actual beach. It's not been sifted, it's as it is. And basically the sand is plastic. There is no sand, it's just plastic that's degraded into microplastics and nanoplastics. And it's just as far as you can see. It's a volcanic beach, so probably the harshness of the volcanic lava there, is, the plastic's quite brittle. That's what causes this to happen, but particularly shocking. I scooped up a bag of plastic when I was there to bring back, and that's now being exhibited in Street Level. There's a display case there with the plastic that I brought back from Hawaii. So it's made the journey, and hopefully it'll make people think about, kind of that beach that exists over there. Also alongside that are containers that I collected from the same beach. These show sharks and turtles' teeth marks in there. You can clearly see the teeth, the bite marks from the plastic that's been ingested. Another really bad beach I visited is in Hong Kong. This is called Lapsat 1 Beach. And the World Wildlife Fund tested the depth of the amount of plastic that was there, and it was 12 feet deep, which is on a scale that I'd kind of never experienced before. So I decided that I would make a project called Hong Kong Soup. I'd carry on the idea of the soup style of work, and I collected beaches and received plastic from 30 different beaches in Hong Kong to give an overall kind of collection of what exists there. The first image started quite by chance when I found a lighter on the floor of the harbour, which is on the left-hand side. And if you look carefully, you can see a dolphin which has been printed onto the plastic sleeve of the throwaway single-use lighter. And at the same time, people were telling me about a pod of dolphins that existed in the harbour that were under threat from extinction, and there were only 80 left. So I decided that I would make a pod of dolphins using the lighters that I collected from the shoreline of the harbour. And here is that image. Also, one of the lighters has an emblem of China, the panda, which is facing away from the rest. And I think that's almost turning its back on man's inability to be responsible for the amount of plastic it produces. Also in Hong Kong, sadly, it had the world's biggest nurdle spill. And nurdles are these little tiny pre-production pellets, which all plastic products are made from. And during a storm, 6 containers of nurdles spilled onto Hong Kong's beaches, causing devastating effects. The main reason with nurdles is that because they're not sealed, they absorb toxins from the ocean, and birds and fish eat the nurdles because they're so small, and these toxins and pollutants are reabsorbed into the fat cells of the birds and fish. I created an image called Spilt, and basically I looked on the NASA website and I looked at the night sky on the day of the spillage, and I copied the kind of composition of the stars and cosmos on that day. So it's almost like a reflection of what was happening under the surface from the night sky. Transform, this is to engage the younger generation in Hong Kong and to transform their habits using transformers and action toys, all sorts of things that kids would have when they were young in Hong Kong, but sadly have entered the ocean. The series Malcolm was talking about, Penalty, this was another project because I wanted to try and engage people to collect plastic for me rather than me collecting plastic all the time. I thought it'd be really good to involve everybody, because in doing that, people think about the issue, they talk to their friends about it. So it spreads awareness just through, you know, the inclusion of collecting and helping create an image. So I put out a call on social media and people started sending me photos of footballs that they'd found on their local beach. This was a man in Scotland, on the west coast of Scotland, and I got an email from him initially saying he'd got 30 footballs that he'd found on the beach, and I was like, it's a lot. It went on 70, 100, and in the end 228 he'd collected here. So I had to go with a small van and collect the footballs to bring back to the studio to then photograph them. In the end, I got 769 footballs from beaches around the world from members of the public, which was amazing. And I realised that when the balls were being posted to me, they all had stories of their own. You know, there was a ball that was recovered in a net that was, they were recovering a seal cub, and they found a football in the net with a seal cub, so they sent me that. A kayaker in Guadeloupe, there was a football floating past him, he sent me that. The green ball at the bottom, that was from Robben Island, where Nelson Mandela was in captivity for most of his life. At the bottom left is a ball that came across with a Japanese tsunami to the west coast of the US and was then returned to its owner afterwards. So 769 footballs from all around the world is the final image I created here. I also created an image for Europe and the UK with different compositions. And I also created one for the one man that Nick, who'd collected 228, because I thought the effort that he'd gone to collect, you know, all those footballs, it deserved an image on its own. So the reach of that was really to coincide with the 2014 FIFA World Cup. And I was lucky enough to be interviewed on CNN Connect the World in the US. So really the global reach of collection and awareness and publicity all, you know, came together, which was amazing. Also, I got many, many emails from schools and communities around the world who went out and collected, this is a school in Houston, the pupils went and collected footballs from some waste ground behind their school and made their own penalty series on the school field as part of their environmental curriculum. So all these things go to sort of help and, you know, spread further awareness. This is a different project again, quite different from my earlier work, Beyond Drifting. It's based on current research that plankton was eating plastic. Initially, this is a scientific experiment in the labs in 2015. But actually, while I was doing the project, it was found that plankton in the natural environment are actually ingesting microplastic particles as well. On the right-hand side, this is a toothpaste tube where I'd squeezed my own toothpaste out and filtered it. And this isn't the microplastics that were found from a tube of toothpaste, the type of microplastics that would be in plankton. So this project was based on John Bon Thompson, who was a marine biologist in Cove at the time. He made pioneering discoveries of plankton, and I wanted to go back and revisit where he was in Cove Harbour, where he collected these, you know, sort of iconic plankton discoveries that no one else had found. And this is what I found in the places where he would have been 200 years ago. So I realised I wanted to kind of create something about the current problem and something about the historical, discoveries that he made. So I collected plastic from the same areas, and I made these kind of fake scientific samples to look like plankton. I wanted to try and trick the viewer, to make them thinking they were looking at plankton, but actually they're looking at plastic that was recovered in an area, 200 years ago. Also, the Latin names, I put in the word plastic within the name, because plankton now have plastic within them, and I wanted the Latin name to have plastic within it as well. So these are some of the items that were collected to create these scientific samples. So as Malcolm mentioned, I wanted to create a book as well as just having single images, and this is the book that was published, the main book. What Malcolm showed was the smaller version of the book, but basically I wanted to have a science book that tricked people again, that they picked it up and they thought it was a book from quite a long time ago, and when they opened it, the pages were mouldy and there were torn marks and blemishes and things like that. And basically the samples of the plastic were shown throughout the book. And then when you got to the back of the book, there was a sealed sticker that said concealed hazard. And when you open the back of the book, it's almost like the index. It gave you the pieces of plastic that were used to make the scientific samples earlier on in the book. So this project was shortlisted with the Prix Pictet Award, which is the largest award in sustainability. And it toured around, I think, about 20 different countries. Along with the exhibition is a cabinet which contains about 12 drawers. This is one of the drawers, and this is on exhibit at Street Level. So you can open the drawers and see the examples that are inside. I've got plastic examples in one of the drawers that were found in Cobh. This particular drawer shows microplastics that have been recovered from Cobh and also from different places around the world. Slides of plankton from the 1800s, images of my sketchbooks and science. So it's really good to have this to underpin the work. This is some of my recent work that's not actually in the exhibition, but I thought it might be interesting for people to see what I'm doing onwards. So in 2019, I went to Henderson Island, which is one of the remotest places in the world. It took 7 days to get there. It's one of only 2 raised coral atolls in the world. So basically the coral reef has risen over time, sort of 300 feet. And this kind of plateau is the coral seabed. It's uninhabited and it's more than 5,000 kilometres from the nearest major landmass. The reason for going there was that in 2017, it was deemed the most plastic polluted beach in the world. So this is how we worked alongside the scientists that went there to discover new, kind of things about plastic on that particular beach. So we went by ship, and every day we crossed by rib to the island. We had to walk around 3 headlands, climb a 300-foot cliff, walk across a jungle plateau, and then 300 foot down the other side of the cliff. Just so people know, sometimes I don't just pick plastic up off a beach. It does actually take quite a lot of effort sometimes on these expeditions. With me, I took my trusty black background, which is the same background I've used for 11 years that I take everywhere. And on Henderson Island, there were hundreds and hundreds of plastic fishing buoys, fishing debris that I wanted to highlight. So I photographed the fishing balls to look like moons and planetary, different planets. I also picked up pieces of plastic and I moved them in front of the fishing buoys to create eclipses. You can see here on the right hand side some of the things that were found on the island and the way I've kind of swung them in front of the fishing buoys to create these kind of lunar eclipses. Some of the items that I used to eclipse, and these were found in the cave on East Beach on Henderson Island. The final few images of the series, I actually used a mask with a circle to create an image of the coral of Henderson Island. So this is actually the coral on Henderson Island. And some of the ground coral I used to make coral dust to create this space-like image of the moon. And basically, this is how I would want Henderson to return to. You know, there's no plastic in this image, and I would want it just to return to the coral as all that it is. Also, I created another series called Shelf Life on the island. Basically, this idea is that the plastic that was found on the island basically, probably safe to say, existed on a shelf somewhere at one point in its life, 5,000 kilometres away on the major landmass, whether it be in a factory, in a shop, on someone's shelf at home. Then it's travelled 5,000 kilometres to get to Henderson, and it's landed onto the coral shelf of Henderson. This is an image I took showing all the different types of plastic that were recovered. I recovered, and the cleanup helpers helped me recover plastic with 45 major brands identified on the plastic and from 25 different countries. The third project on Henderson was done by using a camera which was actually made from plastic debris that I collected from 9 different countries and from 9 different oceans. The main body of the camera is actually a chicken feeder, a water feeder that was washed up on the North Sea. There's all manner of different plastic debris there, but the camera was put together by a photography tutor and his brother, and I took the camera to Henderson Island. It takes medium format film, and amazingly, it did take pictures of the island and of the plastics that were on the island. This is actually a piece of coral, but if you look very carefully, it's got plastic fishing rope all entwined in the coral, which is probably the reason why it got snapped from the reef. Also, just a bit of fun. This is a masked booby, which is living on Henderson Island. There are endemic species there that live nowhere else on the planet. And this bird just spent the whole time cleaning its nest of plastic, picking up the plastic and slinging it to one side. So this again was taken on the camera made from marine debris. So it's almost like the camera took photos of itself. The marine debris took photos of marine debris. And this is the chicken feeder. This is the main body of the camera that was the originating use of it. Also at Street Level, there's a really big image of this picture called We Must Act. And these are Smarty caps. These were in production 13 to 14 years ago. They ceased production. And obviously they produced, you can see letters of the alphabet on the cap. People are probably quite familiar with them. What I wanted to do with that was create a message within the picture. So you can see here a detail where I've used to spell out, we must act. There's lots of different messages in this image, so you might have a bit of fun, you know, finding out what the other ones are. Another one here is how long, 1, 2, and 3. So it's asking the question, how long, you know, before we actually do something serious about plastic pollution. So my work has been exhibited and shown and published in countries, more than 50 countries around the world now. This was a special edition in National Geographic. I've also had the opportunity to speak on many different platforms, you know, going from schools, community groups. I've spoken for the British Embassy and many other embassies. This was a talk I did for Green Week in June this year, and this is in the pre-run to COP26, which is going to happen in Glasgow in November. My work's been exhibited in galleries, but I especially like it when my work's exhibited outside because it can reach people that maybe wouldn't want to go into a gallery, communities that might be walking past and kind of, you know, wonder what it is and then go and read about what it's about. The whole point of my work is to draw the viewer in and then to give them this kind of stab in the back of what it represents, and there's scientific research that's going on at the time. So I've collected plastic from a good coverage all over the world. The blue dots there show the North Pacific expedition. The green dots show the 2 expeditions I did in 2019 to Henderson Island and to Lord Howe Island, where I studied plastic that the shearwater birds have ingested. and this is a new project that will be coming out soon. And I'll just leave you with this image, which is my suitcase if I ever go anywhere. So don't ever come on holiday with me, because you might find that your suitcase gets emptied and filled with plastic for another project that I might have in mind. So I'll end with that. So thank you for listening. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Mandy. So you can come out of screen share now.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find them.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. Well, that was fascinating and disturbing. There's a story you share on your website about a cassette mixtape that you found washed up from the North Atlantic Ocean. Could you tell us a little bit about that briefly?
Yes, I was on holiday in Lanzarote, and I wasn't meant to be collecting plastic pollution, but you know, you can't help but spot things when you walk along. And I found a cassette, the old cassette mixtape, floating in the ocean there. And I brought it home and dried it out, and kind of forgot about it for about a year. Actually, it was on my windowsill. And then I thought, oh, it might be quite interesting to see if there's anything on the tape. It was really battered and there was no text or anything on it. It was just the case of a cassette tape. I sent it to an audio restorer who managed to retrieve the tape from inside and find the tracks that were on the tape. And this coincided with me having an exhibition at Photographic in Sweden, in Stockholm. So I thought it'd be really good if they could maybe play the tape in the exhibition. But actually, it turned out that the songs were probably a bit too jovial to have in the exhibition. But we had a section where the tape was in a display case and you could put on headphones and listen to the songs. So yeah, somebody visiting the exhibition recognised the tape as being their own tape, recognised the playlist, and wrote to me a few weeks later and said they were absolutely astonished because it's quite an unusual mixtape. For example, the third track is Jungle Book Groove, which isn't something that probably everybody would have on their own mixtape. So they knew that the order and the things that they'd got on there was theirs. And coincidentally, she'd lost the tape when she was on holiday in 1993 as a 13-year-old. And I asked scientists, you know, would it be possible if where she lost it, it could have washed up in Lanzarote, which is obviously Spanish islands. And they said it's a possibility. It could have, you know, reached there. So if so, that would be 25 years in the sea. So yeah, that's the story. Yeah. But the coincidence of her finding, she was actually from Berlin and she was on holiday herself, and she visited the exhibition and just, you know, was astounded to sort of see it there with the tracks. Yeah, and so yeah, the media sort of found out about that, and yeah, I think it was in every publication and newspaper. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for quite some time.
It's fascinating story to convey the message, isn't it?
It is, again, because it's another way to get the message out there, and that's what I always try and do. You know, that's not particularly through imagery. I mean, that's just through an event or something. But again, you know, it's making people think about the problem. Yeah, absolutely. The aesthetic of your work, I mean, it's not photojournalistic. I think you have commented upon this, that when you started out in this, you took more straightforward documentary images, but it tended to just kind of wash over people, excuse the pun. But could you tell us a little bit more about the process? And it relates to a question that has come through from Cara Rose, saying your work is very powerful. How do you create your images? Are they composites? So how do you make them? Yeah, I'm going back to what you said. Yeah, I did photograph them as I found them on the beach. You know, I tried to make artistic styles in a documentary style approach, but even then I found that people weren't really interested. It's almost like they see too much rubbish at the side of motorways or fly tipping or whatever, and people switch off quite quickly. So I realised I had to create something that people looked at for longer, and it drew them in to find out what they were actually looking at and where things were found, etc. So yeah, the indefinite was the first idea to do them on the black because the colours really seemed to pop out. And then for the soup style images, the majority of those are done in 3 layers. So I randomly scatter the smaller pieces onto the black velvet first, and then I scatter the medium-sized pieces and then the larger pieces, and then those 3 layers are sandwiched together, and somehow the small bits with the large bits seem to create this depth of suspension, which I feel represents what exists under the sea, obviously in a more confined collection, but that was the idea, to, you know, kind of show what's there in this way.
Yeah, okay. Another question that's come through here from Evis. Great work, very informative and harrowing. I wonder about the effect of oestrogen in plastic on life in the ocean. Are there other areas of plastic in the ocean you might investigate?
Yeah, I mean, the type of plastic that enters the ocean, you know, there's new things that are coming about all the time. One thing I particularly feel strongly about is clothing, fibres from clothing. You know, these are washed in the washing machine, and we don't have any filters on our washing machine, and they're not caught in waste management treatment works, so they end up by going out into the ocean and ending up in the stomachs of fish. So all these microplastics, nanoplastics, these tiny little plastics, even that we breathe in through the air, it's very, very worrying, because, you know, plastics have been found recently in the placenta of a pregnant woman, you know, and they're in many organs and things like that. So, you know, not just marine life, birds, creatures of the sea, ultimately affects human health. And once we find links to, you know, the effects, because we're very early in the stages of research in plastic, really. I mean, climate change research has been going on for 30 years, but in relative terms, plastic is very newly researched, and we don't know enough. But I'm convinced myself that it must have some impact on human health at some point.
Yeah, yeah. Recycling, Mandy. Now, we all like to recycle these days, but there's some myths surrounding aspects of this, isn't there? Is there any comment you would like to make about this?
Yeah, I'd like to say recycling is the answer to start with, because to recycle, much energy and, you know, again, fossil fuels are used in the recycling process, which kind of defeats the object. You know, plastic pollution is a result of fossil fuels, and, you know, from extraction, manufacture, production, recycling, you know, fossil fuels are used all the way. And some of the products that are recycled can only be recycled a couple of times. So it's not the answer to think that we can recycle our way out of the mess we've got ourselves into. I mean, you know, there have been statistics of, you know, only 9% of plastic ever produced has ever been recycled. So it doesn't happen. Certainly in England, we send a lot of our plastic still to countries that can't even manage their own infrastructure in waste. You know, developing countries. So, you know, to send plastic there and in the hope that they can recycle it is, you know, just not the answer. The only answer is to stop producing this excessive amount of plastic. You know, I don't want to be negative about that, because, you know, it's a way of keeping the loop. You know, some things can be kept in the loop by recycling, but, you know, essentially it's not the answer.
Yeah, yeah. So a couple of questions here I'd like to conjoin. Isa, colleague here from Street Level, asks, says, such powerful work, very moving. It's all really shocking, but does any item in particular that you've come across stand out in your mind as being unbelievable? And add to that, more unbelievable than the unbelievable of many things that you find. And Bill Millett says that plankton eating plastic may spark people to think as it enters the food chain. Your aesthetic of depth illustrates the micro level we may encounter. I hope I've read that correctly, Bill. So there's a couple of, one's a comment, one's a question.
Yeah, well, I hope so. I hope it just makes people think, because that's the aim of my work. You know, microplastics are not only found in plankton at the base of the food chain, they're found in mussels, in oysters, all sorts of seafood. So ultimately it ends up on our dinner plate and we're eating plastic. I mean, we sleep in it, we breathe it, we eat it. You know, that's a fact at the moment. Sorry, what was the first question?
It was any item in particular you've come across that's been true?
Well, I found a pair of false teeth. I don't know if that's usual. But the things that really sicken me are, it's single-use plastics that's the most unnecessary thing, because when you're picking them up and looking at them, and you know, a lot of sanitary products that are directly flushed down the toilet, that are just coating the beaches, you know, that are used once and might remain in the ocean for hundreds of years, is just particularly galling, because you know that they're only used for seconds. You know, some plastic cups and plastic bottles might only be used for, you know, minutes, and to think that they're there to, you know, have detrimental effects is very, very sad.
Jenny Brownrigg comments here. The camera made from recycled plastic is brilliant, and she asks the question, has the way you've physically produced your prints and materials used in the photography process changed in any aspect of the last decade to take on sustainable aspects?
Yes, it has. Whenever I do exhibitions, you know, kind of new exhibitions, I always stipulate that environmental materials have to be used wherever possible. Sometimes it's difficult with the prints, but what the prints are mounted on, there's a lot of eco board and eco materials that can, you know, the print can be taken off and the mounting boards can be recycled. Wherever I do exhibitions now, I always ask if they can travel or they can be used elsewhere. So it means that my work's not constantly being produced. For example, this exhibition at Street Level, you know, it's travelled to, I think, 6 different venues so far. The same work is travelled. So that's another aspect of not having to use new prints and just churn out, you know, new things. So yeah, I'm very aware of that. Obviously, I have to be.
Okay. David Buchanan, I beg your pardon. To what extent is the fishing industry responsible for plastic pollution?
Well, on Henderson Island, you know, there was a huge amount of fishing-related debris, and they do say it's almost half in, you know, in a lot of areas. Nets that are, you know, kind of freely cut from fishing boats that then are left rather than mended. You know, they act as ghost nets and they catch fish and other creatures in the net. All these things are changing now, and there are many incentives for fishermen to bring their nets back to the shore to be, you know, recycled in some way. There's an initiative in Italy that I was involved with, where they were collecting fishing nets from the seafloor and bringing them back and making the nets into fuel. So, I mean, all these things use energy to do that. But I think, you know, the answer is if things can be used with low carbon footprint to create another use, this circularity is, you know, of utmost importance. Yeah,
absolutely. And as part of the exhibition, there is a kind of interactive wall that's travelled with the exhibition, where people can write their plastic pledges with pencils, I should say, not plastic pens. So that must have that has surely accumulated a mass of very interesting and proactive responses from the public. Is there anything you could draw our attention to there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's good, because hopefully, you know, I always want to have something in the exhibition where, you know, people always say, what can I do? You know, I can direct them to sign petitions, to, you know, do whatever it might be. But I think for them to write their own pledge it makes them think about their plastic use on a daily basis, and they might think, oh, actually, I could cut down on that. Or, you know, even tea bags, some tea bags now got plastic in the bag. So there are certain tea bags that do and certain tea bags that don't. So maybe that's something that they might think about. You know, if they can take reusable bags instead of, you know, buying plastic ones. The same with plastic bottles, you know, choose glass. You know, instead of buying shampoos and all that sort of thing, you can actually buy a shampoo bar, like a bar of soap. And also now, I'm not sure about Scotland, but there's a lot of refill shops popping up in local communities where if you have a bottle of shampoo or something like that, you can actually take it back and get it refilled without having to buy a new product, without having to buy a new plastic container. And that goes across detergents, you know, many wide areas. So, you know, I think it's good for people to think, you know, just stand back and think, actually, my bin's full of plastic. How could I have changed that or chosen a different option? You know, choosing vegetables that aren't in plastic, you can choose them loose instead. So there's many different ways where we can stop buying plastic. And if we stop buying plastic, manufacturers won't produce enough because there's nobody there to buy it.
Absolutely. Well, that's kind of a good moment to maybe wind things up. Mandy, been a real inspiration to hear you speak, and a call to action, really. Particularly interesting, of course, because, you know, what your work about is the power of photography to educate, communicate and inspire change.
Definitely.
So we thank you very much for that. There are things to do, lots of action and lots of challenges on all of our parts as individuals. So on that note, we will bring it to an end. I would like to thank you, Mandy, for your time and a wonderful presentation.